silence.
We were treated like collections of toy whistles and butterflies, and we were simply pressed between pages of other people's history.
During the colonization of North America, the bones of its original inhabitants were regarded as little more than scientific curiosities. Archaeologists and anthropologists have collected and studied them at will. Now, the Native Americans want their ancestors back.
This is going to be a terrible loss of knowledge. To me, it's just like burning books.
The message is that anthropologists have been deaf for too long to Native American concerns, and now they have to listen.
Sunny on Tuesday, high 42, and sunny on Wednesday, high 39.
This is where it all began back in 1971. My husband, John Pearson, was the construction engineer in charge of rebuilding Highway 34. And it was when they found the cemetery. It was part of a village at the turn of the century. When my husband came in from work, he says, "Honey, you're going to be really upset when I tell you what happened at work today." And he told me that they had taken 26 white people out of the graves. And I said, "Who did that?" He said, "The state archaeologist." He said, "That's his job." And we called him in to do this. And he took them in new caskets and took them to the local cemetery for reburial. But he said they took the Indian girl and her baby and put their remains in a box and took her to Iowa City for study. And I said, that's discrimination. If they were all buried at the same time, then they should have studied the 26 white people too. When I went out to pray that night, I heard a tingling sound that came through, almost like crystal. And I heard my grandma say, "I told you, girl, you would have to stand up for what you believe in." And she said, "You must protect where your ancestors lie."
The following morning, Maria made the journey to the state capitol to see the governor of Iowa.
If I was going to go for advice to anybody, I would have went to my chief. And I thought, he is supposed to be the chief in charge of everybody in Iowa. So I went to see him. I walked right into the Capitol building and right up to the governor's office. I happened to look up and the governor was peeking at me around the corner of the door. And I thought, well, he can't be too bad. So when I entered the room, the governor was standing in front of his desk and he said, "Well, running moccasins, have a seat." And I said, "No, thank you. I can stand for what I have to say to you." And he said, "Well, then how can I help you?" I said, "You can give me back my people's bones and you can quit digging them up."
Maria Pearson's personal battle caught the public imagination. And in 1976, the state of Iowa passed the first law in America protecting Indian burial sites. Law after law followed in other states, but the legislation was particularly tough in California.
In 1989, I contracted to conduct an archaeological survey in Indian Wells, California. We discovered a charred area in the desert sand.
Hi, my name's Jeannie Ballinger. I'm a senior in wildlife biology here at Iowa State, and I'm the president of the United Native American Student Association and of the American Indian Rights Organizations. and I would like to welcome you to the keynote address of the 33rd Annual Symposium on the American Indian here at Iowa State University. This year's theme is Turtle Island, Sacred Land, and we will also be having continuous events through tomorrow as well. In the morning, the symposium will show the film Who Owns the Past, with commentary and discussion from 9 to 11 a.m. in the gallery upstairs. There will also be activities for children at the same time in rooms 244 to 246, and these will include storytelling, flute playing, and various crafts, and adults are welcome there as well, of course. In the afternoon and evening, there will be a celebratory exhibition powwow with grand entries at 1 and 7 in the Folker Gym. And these events are all free and open to the public, and we would hope that you will be able to join us for all or part of them. The 2004 33rd Annual Symposium on the American Indian is sponsored by Iowa State University's American Indian Symposium Committee and the Native student groups on campus, the United Native American Student Association, the American Indian Rights Organization, and the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. The original artwork for the 2004 symposium image was created by last year's featured artist, James Starkey. Funding and support for the program are provided by the government of the student body, the University Committee on Lectures, the United Native American Student Association, the American Indian Rights Organization, the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, American Indian Studies Program, David and Hannah Gradwell, the Office of the President, and the Office of the Provost. Also, the Colleges of Design, Agriculture, and Liberal Arts and Sciences, the Department of Art and Design, Architecture, Landscape Architecture, Anthropology, and Natural Resource Ecology Management, as well as the Richard Thompson Memorial Fund, the Student Union Board, the College of Design Art Club, the Office of Minority Student Affairs, Office of the Vice President of Student Affairs, the Center for Excellence in Arts and Humanities, Pioneer Hybrid International, and the Miller Lectures Fund. The keynote speaker at the symposium is also known as the Richard Thompson Memorial Speaker. And before we introduce our speaker tonight, I would like to introduce David Gradwell, ISU Professor of Anthropology, retired, and former advisor of the Native student groups on campus, to say a few words about this event.
Good evening. I want to add my welcome to you to Iowa State University's 33rd Annual American Indian Symposium entitled Turtle Island, Sacred Land. I also congratulate the co-chairs for the 2004 American Indian Symposium Committee, Irma Wilson-White, Lynn Paxson, Joe Wagner, Gene Spar, Ballinger, and Eric Lim for organizing this excellent program. The American Indian Symposium is the oldest and longest continuing project dealing with diversity and multicultural awareness on the ISU campus. The lecture this evening honors the memory of an ISU graduate who devoted his life to assisting descendants of the original inhabitants of Turtle Island, particularly in the areas of education and legal rights. The presentation this evening is the 31st in a series of annual lectures dedicated to the memory of Richard W. Thompson. Rick's parents, Larry and Marge Thompson from Kansas City, are with us again this evening, as they have been almost every year since 1971. Joining them and us this evening is their daughter, Susie. The Thompson family's continuing interest and support of Iowa State University and the American Indian Symposium are appreciated. Rick Thompson was born at Glens Falls, New York on April 19, 1949. He grew up in Kansas City and came to Ames to attend ISU. During his residence in Ames, Rick served as clerk of the Ames Friends Meeting. As a 20-year-old, Rick was respected as a leader of both young and old. While at ISU, Rick was a member of the Cyclone AIDS, Cardinal Key, and the University Lectures Committee. He graduated in 1971 with majors in anthropology and geology. Rick was on the National Affairs Institute Committee and chaired the first American Indian Symposium in 1971. Outcomes of that symposium included the formation of UNASA, the United Native American Student Association, and several years later, the American Indian Studies program at ISU. After graduation, Rick worked in Washington, D.C. with the Friends Committee on National Legislation in Indian Affairs. As a Quaker, Rick was opposed to the war in Vietnam, but he went to Vietnam as a volunteer civilian worker at the Quang Ngai Hospital. In pursuit of his duties there, he met a tragic and untimely death in an airplane crash on November 17, 1973. Rick Thompson's life was dedicated to the attainment of human rights for American Indians and all human beings. His example epitomizes the dedication to purpose and action necessary to attain these goals. His exemplary spirit continues to inspire and motivate us today as we continue the struggle to recognize and maintain human diversity on campus, in our nation, and throughout the world. Introducing the 2004 Richard Thompson Memorial Lecture is Jean Spar Ballinger, whom you heard previously. She is an active participant and leader in American Indian organizations on campus and the American Indian Symposium Committee. This year, she is president of both UNASA and ARRO, the American Indian Rights Organization. She's a busy woman.
Thank you, David. Tonight's speaker is Clyde H. Belcourt from the White Earth Anishinaabe Ojibwe Nation. Clyde Belcourt is a lifelong proponent of American Indian civil and spiritual rights, co-founding the American Indian Movement in 1968, marching on Washington, D.C., and occupying the Bureau of Indian Affairs building in 1972, and participating in the occupation of Wounded Knee in South Dakota in 1973. Mr. Belcourt's activism moved into education, spirituality, and cultural survival when he founded the Federation of Native American Controlled Survival Schools in 1975, and continues with his activities such as founder and chairman of the Circle for Survival Consortium 1980, founder and executive director of the Elaine M. Stateley Peacemaker Center in 1989, as well as spiritual organizer and leader, gathering of the Sacred Pipes Sundance and International Elders and Youth Spiritual Gathering 1991-1998. Mr. Belcourt continues to hold positions with many of the organizations he founded and is nationally known and highly sought after speaker on spirituality, American Indian civil rights, and sacred concerns. Mr. Belcourt was born on the White Earth Reservation in Minnesota and has firsthand knowledge of Native American sacred land concerns throughout the country. His talk tonight is entitled Sacred Spaces and Places, a Native American Perspective. Please help me welcome Mr. Clyde Belcourt.
Bonjour. Nigan Nawewidan, Indigenous Cause, O Sishak, Dodain, Anishinaabe, O Gitchida. My real name is Nigan Nawewidan, or the thunder before the storm. And I certainly like that a lot better than Clyde. But I didn't get that name at birth, as I should have. Because when I was born 67 years ago, we were forbidden by the United States government, the United States of America, to have traditional spiritual names. I didn't get my name until I came home from Wounded Knee in 1973. After being fatally shot by an FBI operative on the Rosebud Reservation, survived. When I got home, unknown to me, tobacco was given to a young spiritual leader from Wisconsin by the name of Bagwebidam, or Eddie Benton Benes, 5th degree Grand Chief of the Three Fires Society of the Madeiran, or Heart Way of Life. They wanted to honor me, the small band of Anishinaabe people, nation. They wanted to present me with an eagle feather, and they wanted to recognize me as a chief. And that, by the way, has passed down through my family. But in order to receive that eagle feather, to even touch an eagle feather at one time, you had to have an Indian name. And so this young man was sent off into the woods, unknown to me, to fast, so the Creator would come to him through a vision, through a dream, and tell him what my name would be. And he said on the third day of his fast, 3 o'clock in the morning, sleeping, dreaming, he could see the sheet lightning coming from the west, lighting up the sky. As it got closer to where he was, way out in the woods by himself in a little lean-to, the trees started to blow back and forth. And all of a sudden there was a bolt of lightning, thunder, woke him up. It started to drizzle. The next day and next morning, I was invited into a purification ceremony prior to receiving this eagle feather, to prepare myself for that beautiful ceremony that was to take place. And he told me that my name, the Creator bestowed the name of Nigan Nawewidan in his dream, in this storm that came, that I would be the thunder before the storm from that day forth. That's how beautiful it was at one time in our history. Every morning without failure, every single morning, every tribe in this nation, every Indian person here in the Western Hemisphere at one time had any names given to them by the Creator, Neshomas Gitchumani, to a grandfather, Great Spirit, God, the same person that every single one of you in this room believes in. We did too. We had our own way of communicating. We had no religion. Religion was unknown to us at that time. Religion came over on a boat. Jesus and the devil came too, and a bottle of alcohol. None of them existed in this part of the world. But we had a way, a very sacred traditional way of life. Every tribe, every person, every family, every nation had ceremonies that they performed. Every morning when they got up, they prepared themselves with prayer and songs and their shakers, asking for guidance that day. Whether it would be going out to hunt, going out to fish, go out to pick the blueberries, hunt the buffalo. Whatever they were going to do, they asked the Creator for guidance. And when they got home, when they came back home from their fishing trip, or picking blueberries, or harvesting the wild rice, when they came back home, there was a Thanksgiving. Every single day of the week, and then people celebrated. They didn't wait till the last Thursday of the month of November that Abraham Lincoln declared the Thanksgiving. They didn't have to wait until then. They were thankful for everything that they had, everything that they received. And when they prayed, they never asked for anything for themselves, but they asked the Creator, Mishomish Gitchimaitu, our grandmother, the Mother Earth. They asked her to provide for those that were in need, to help those that needed help. In every one of our prayers yet today, we're told never to ask anything for ourselves, but for those that are hurting, those that are in pain, those that are hungry, we pray for them. Because we know that hundreds and thousands of other people are also praying, and they're praying for us, so we don't have to pray for ourselves. That's the way it was. Everything was done in a traditional, ceremonial, sacred way at one time, before those boats arrived here. When Christopher Columbus landed here in the Caribbean, he made a statement, got it back to King Ferdinand and Isabella. He said he came upon a people, one of the most civilized people in the world, anywhere in the world. He came upon a paradise where everything was pure, the water that you drank. You could drink it right out of the rivers and the lakes. It was pure and clean. He said there are people that need no Bible because they practice that way of life 24 hours a day. He said they'll give you anything, anything that you ask them for, anything. They'll take the shirt off their back if you're cold and you're wet, and they'll give it to you. He said they are perfect for exploitation. All this part of Mother Earth was a sacred site at that time in history. Historians today are saying, including the newly commissioner that they're trying to right now vote in at the state legislature, Sherry Pearson Yeki, are saying that he inadvertently brought smallpox with him, one of the crew members. She was on public radio on November 5th, and she made some Caucasian, non-Indian. She's going to change all the social studies standards, going to take out all the treaty struggles, the hunting and fishing rights, the sovereignty struggle that Indian people are going through, the American Indian movement, Chief Joseph, all of our great leaders, philosophers. She's going to take them all out of the curriculum. And the Republicans are introducing a whole new social studies standards for all the children, all the students in Minnesota. She's going to put Pocahontas in there, Christopher Columbus, Squanto, Sacagawea. They're going to replace all the advancements that Indian people made. And this Caucasian, this non-Indian person whose daughter goes to school in Minneapolis, called her on public radio. The whole state was listening. If you're going to teach my daughter, if you're going to make Christopher Columbus the hero, then I want you to teach her about the genocide and the smallpox. She said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. That didn't happen here in America. That happened in Germany under Stalin and Hitler. It didn't happen here in America. She shocked the whole state. Senators and congressmen, representatives were calling me, replaying the videotape, replaying the audio of that statement. And I called some of the noted historians, Dr. Roger Bucklehead, Dr. Will Antell, Dr. Chris Cavender, one of the foremost historians on history of the Dakota people in the state of Minnesota. They already heard what was said. Would you prepare some papers? Would you put something down on paper? I need it. Next Tuesday, I'm going to the Department of Education, and I'm going to have one of the most massive demonstrations ever had there to confront this commissioner before she is confirmed. And they put all of it together, and I couldn't believe I'm still a student myself. I'm still learning. I know about that much about our own people. I was never allowed to know those things when I was a child. They told me that just 21 years after Columbus landed in the Caribbean, there was 11.5 million Indian people erased from the face of the earth. They went on to write the history of the conquistadors. Talked about how Columbus, they didn't bring enough gold, they cut their fingers off. So many ounces of gold, if they didn't bring them in, they cut their hands, pretty soon their arms and then their heads. And even if it was body or inadvertently, the smallpox, it was used from that day forth. 11.5 million Indian people in 21 years. The conquistadors they talked about, they did their work. Dr. Buffalo had Dr. Cavender. They did their work. They talked about how they used to fill the coliseums with Indian people, women and children. They'd ride with their horses and bet money on who could cut the heads off fastest. There's estimates now that over 100 million Indian people have been erased from the face of the earth. Dr. Chris Cavender, noted historian, Marshall State University, Marshall, Minnesota, came out with what happened there. One of the most massive hangings in the history of America took place right there the day after Christmas in 1862, when they hung 38 Dakota people. He said that following the Little Crow Uprising in 1862, there was hundreds and thousands of Dakota people rounded up. And they were taken to what they call military tribunals, almost like an assembly belt. Never spent more than 3 or 5 minutes in the courtroom. Somebody would point him on. I saw him at this assault that took place. I saw him shoot this white man, this farmer. I saw him touch that white lady. They convict him. When they got done, they had over 400 of them. Over 400 of them were scheduled to be hung. Fortunately, for most of them, they didn't have enough rope. They were supposed to hang them on November 5th. They had the requisition, the rope, from all the way from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And while that process was to get that rope was in process, Bishop William Whipple, the Episcopal Church, went to visit old Honest Abe in Washington, D.C. He pled their case. I know this family. They go to my church. They've been Christianized. They're good people. You can't allow them, President, to be hung. And so Abraham Lincoln sat with them and they started erasing all the names. They got all the way down to 38. And the political pressure was so intense from the state of Minnesota, the Pioneer Press was calling for blood. And he finally cut it off. He said, I can't go any further. And he signed the death certificate on 38 Dakota people. When that orders came down, it was Christmas time. Peace on earth, goodwill toward men. You can't hang them that day. So day after Christmas, one day after Christmas, thousands of people gathered, doctors and came from all over the world. William Mayo, the Mayo people, the Mayo brothers were there. They marched them out of the stockade. It's set above the entrance out into where they're going to be hung. Peace on earth, goodwill toward men. He took those 38 people, put them up. Over 1,200 bands and band drums and bugles and everything were there to play for this execution. Doctors came from all over to cast lots for the bodies. to use them in the higher schools of learning in Mayo Clinic for pre-med studies. They marched them up, and the only thing that they were opposed to the hoods that they put over their head. They struggled, told them, talking in Indian to interpret, they didn't want those hoods to be put on their head. They wanted to look the Creator, the Mishomi's grandfather was coming up in the east, and they wanted to look the Creator, look at him, pray. And as the bands and the drums started to roll, these Indian people, they turned around, they started twisting themselves, and they turned around and they joined hands together. They're handcuffed, their hands tied. And the band stopped playing because the Indian people start singing. They were singing a prayer song, saying that they were ready. They did their job and they're ready now to give their life for the people. They pulled the doors and they dropped. Later on, they found out that many of them, had they been tried, given proper trial, probably not one of them would have been hung. William Mayo cast lots. The body of Shakopee, one of their famed chiefs, was given to him. When the American Indian movement was formed in Bonn in July of 1968, they were still using Chief Shakopee's skeletal remains for studies at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Nobody knew that. The other great chief, Little Crow, an old man that was really against the uprising, reluctantly joined it when the young warriors confronted him. They were starving. All of the food and all the medicine that was promised that tribe in return for all the land that was given up in the Treaty of 1856. All the food and the medicine was rotting in the warehouses in St. Paul. And these young warriors, they went to confront the Indian agent, cold, night, hungry. So if they didn't have this food, didn't have this medicine, their people would not, they would perish. And the trader laughed at him and told him that as far as he was concerned, they could eat grass. That's only one of the stories told that touched off the War of 1862 and the Little Crow Uprising. And when it was over, they started rounding up all the Dakota people. Even if they believed or thought that they were involved in the uprising in any way, they could kill them. Individuals could kill them and bring their scalp in. We didn't know anything about scalping in Minnesota. Colonel Sibley, under Governor Ramsey, carried out that policy. $25 a scalp. They didn't bring enough in, so they raised it to $80. And at the tail end of that policy, they were paying $200 a scalp. The Indians referred to him as Long Knife Sibley. That's the history that was gathered in just 4 days by these scholars. Documented history that can be found through work, hard work, studies, could be found and given. All this package was prepared, and we took it to the press conference. The 3 doctors showed up to make the statements. And then I found out something that was totally astounding to me, something I knew nothing about. That in 1868, then President of the United States, Ulysses Grant, put together a special commission in Washington, D.C. to find out the cost of eliminating all Indian people left in America. 1868. Of course, they could do that because we weren't even considered human beings at that time. And when they brought the report back, they estimated it would cost $6.5 billion to eradicate all Indian people. but hundreds and thousands of non-Indians and mixed-buts would die in the process. So they shelved that, they put that aside and went into the peacemaking era, knowing beforehand that every treaty that they made with us, when it became necessary to violate them, they would violate them. And almost every treaty that was made, our grandfathers, not the government, we're the ones that gave up the land. They didn't give us nothing. I always hear these say, well, I don't know why you Indian people are complaining. We give you this big reservation and they didn't give us nothing. We were one of the greatest welfare agencies in the world at one time. Everything that America has today was given to them by Indian people. So they wrote into their treaties, like the Lakota Nation, this Pahasapa, this sacred land that you set aside for your spiritual and traditional way of life, for your ceremony. This is where your creation story begins, in Wind Cave and the Black Hills. The chiefs had written this, but the only way they could understand, forever, this land will be yours as long as the grass grows green, the rivers flow, or the sun shines. But they must have had some invisible ink that we didn't know about. This land will be yours as long as the grass grows green, the rivers flow, or the sun shines, until we discover some gold, until we find some uranium, or we find some oil, or some rich timber forests, or water that is needed. Then the grass would quit growing, the rivers would quit flowing, and the sun would quit shining. That's the history. That's what happened to Indian people. All of their sacred sites, if they're not taken from them through this deception, through these lies, is being exploited yet today. It's perfectly all right. It's perfectly all right to dig up Indian burial grounds, take artifacts out of them, either put them on display or market them around the world. I've seen little clay pots that were taken out of graves in Dixon Mounds in Bloomington, Illinois. Little clay pots no bigger than that, sold for $60,000 in Europe. It's a multi-billion-dollar business to rob Indian graves and sell these artifacts or put them in museums all over the world. It happened to every tribe in this nation. I was fortunate last night to listen to Daniel Wildcat. I always enjoy listening to him. Sometimes I just close my eyes and I can feel and see everything that he's saying. How people have to wake up and take a look around them. Look at what the Indian people still have to offer. Maybe we'll survive if we start practicing some of that way of life. And today when my sister here was speaking, it was hard for me. Pain inside me. She talked about her mother, lack of compassion that she felt as a child because that was taken away from her. Her mother in the boarding school systems and her father. How she looked up to her grandma as her mother, looked up to her aunties as her mother because they took care of her. They gave her the love that she needed. Every Indian in this country has been through that. Every one of us. Usually when I open talks, I talk about my mother. I talk about my father. Because sometimes people say, oh, that Clyde Belcourt, they're militant and they're radicals, they don't represent me. When I talk about my mother, when I talk about my father, I'm talking about every Indian in America, whether they like it or not. My mother was whisked off the White Earth off the streets, 8 years old, carted off to a boarding school. Was there for 9.5 years. Twice the time that most rapists and murderers spend in prison. My mother was taken to that boarding school. Punished severely every time they caught her speaking Indian. Not just her, hundreds and thousands. All of our mothers, all of our grandmothers, all of our grandfathers, uncles and aunts, every one of them went through that. Not just mine. When I was growing up as a little boy, my mom, when it seemed like when the weather changed, her legs would swell up, her knees. Mom, I have 7 sisters and 4 other brothers. Mom, what's wrong with your legs? How come you're hurting? Oh, it's just the weather, huh? It's just the weather, she'd say. Go to school, study hard, learn the English language. Who knows, you might be president someday, huh? A great doctor, a great educator. That's what she'd tell us. All the time, every time we asked that question, you never once ever told us what they did to her. Late at night, I'd hold Old Lady Smith from Whitehurst, Mrs. Big Bear. They think all the children were sleeping upstairs. These old ladies whispering. I think they didn't want us to hear them. They greet one another in the Anishinaabe language. They come in, they drink coffee and eat pie, tell stories. Carly was talking about today. Laughs. They get noisier and noisier, you know. They couldn't keep it down, so we'd hear them. Pretty soon they'd be laughing so hard, someone would be crying, they'd fall right off the chair. Then the alarm clock would go off. We'd wake up. Time to go to school. St. Benedict's Mission. St. Benedictine Order, the Catholic Church. Tough. You know, nuns look like the front line of the Green Bay Packers. Tough place to go. Mom, I heard you talking last night. Lady Big Bear. Mrs. Smith. Mom, you had such a good time. How come you don't teach us to speak that language? Oh, forget about that. That's the past. Go to school, study hard. Who knows, you might be a great leader someday. Wasn't until after Wounded Knee, when I was part of the formation of the American Indian Movement, I started marching on the police force and racism, dealing with housing and health issues and unemployment, racism, treaty rights, being shot at and shot. I was shot right below the heart. I was surrounded by all the military force of the United States government for 71 days at Wounded Knee. I didn't even know my mom started developing heart problems, worrying about me, stress. She'd go to Denver to visit my brother Vernon, stay there for months. I don't know what's wrong with my son. He's getting shot at, getting beat up by police, but he's still out in the streets every day. And to help. My brother come to visit me, my brother Vernon. He's part of the movement today. Come and confront me. Look, you're driving your mother to the grave. You got to stop. I said, I can't turn around. I can't turn back. We have schools going. We have health programs. We have job training. We have legal rights centers. We have patrols out in the streets. We're going to courts every day. We're dealing with racism in the schools. We're helping our children. We're keeping them out of jail, out of the prisons where I spent most of my life. I can't stop. Finally, my mom came home. She finally saw the beauty. She saw the power was coming back. Children being proud of who they were. Schools being developed, health programs, housing. Minneapolis, there's more things going on for Indian people than anywhere in the world today. She started to see that. And one night she sat me down. All your life, you asked me about my legs, about the arthritis that I have today. I never wanted to tell you these things. She was trying to protect us. She knew that if we knew how to speak Indian, if we practiced the Indian way of life, we would end up like her, punished for it. She said in the boarding schools, every time they caught her, Not just her, hundreds and thousands of women, young little ladies, girls. They'd give them a little toothbrush, a little pail of scoop water and a rag, and they crawled across the floors and scrubbed floors. After school all evening, late into the night, cleaning out the urinals and the toilets. Then she told me the shocker. I can't even explain to you the feeling inside me when she told me what they did. Not just her, hundreds like her. Tied sacks of marbles to her knees and made her scrub floors that way. And that crippled her the rest of her life. Then I understood why I couldn't speak Indian. I understood why I didn't know anything about the Madawan way of life. Then I understood why I didn't have an Indian name, why I didn't know how to sing, why I didn't know how to pray. Oh, I could do rosaries. St. Benedictine order, if you did something during the day, you went and sat in the sanctuary after school and prayed rosaries all night with a big nun sitting there watching, Mother Superior. I knew how to say Our Fathers. We did it repetitively every day of the week. I knew acts of contrition because I had to go to confessions every Saturday night before church. I knew what it was to kneel on a pew on my knees, a wooden pew, for hours on end. I had to go to the Stations of the Cross for 40 days, 40 nights. But I ran away. I ran away every chance I got. And when I was 11 years old, I was judged incorrigible and sent to a little place called Red Wing State Training School. I spent 3.5 years there. One of the first Indian young boys to be sent away from my reservation into that type of environment. In Red Wing, they had children all the way from 6 years to